Hey everybody, it's Sunday. That means it's time for the weekend video. Get ready. Hey everybody. Just this weekend, I realized something when I was at a convenience store. For the past few years, it seems like I couldn't walk into a convenience store almost anywhere, at least in the South, where they didn't sell these little rubber-like bracelets. And on the bracelet it says WWJD. And that stands for What Would Jesus Do? Those were always a pet peeve of mine. Like, I always got irritated when I saw those things, and especially when I saw people wearing them. Um, it's infuriating if you really understand grace. And it's really infuriating if you understand grace cannot be mixed with any kind of law, without any kind of um, do right or do wrong kind of legalistic mentality. You can't mix grace and law. It just does not work. Um, and I'll tell you who else was infuriated by the mixture of grace and law. It's Paul. Paul was infuriated when he confronted the Galatians because apparently somebody came behind him and started uh, teaching them to adopt Judaism. And a they were Judaizers, let's put it that way. They believed and preached Jesus, but they also um, got the Galatians to adhere to at least part of the law, and that included circumcising their males. And it infuriated Paul he, because um, and Paul said that they had abandoned the gospel of grace and for another gospel, which is really no gospel at all. It's a false gospel. You do not mix any kind of rules, commandments of any kind with the new covenant of grace and peace. They do not belong in the new covenant. That was the old, and it was made obsolete. And so when people are trying to be good Christians and they're reminding themselves with a bracelet on their wrist, what would Jesus do in certain situations? They're trying to be like Jesus would have been. And what they're really doing is they're ignoring what Jesus did. See, what Jesus did was he took away all these um, commandments that were based on performance, and he ushered in a new covenant of peace and grace, where it is only by his grace and his belief and his obedience that all are saved, and not by your own self-righteousness, not by your own deeds, not by your efforts to be righteous. Your efforts to be righteous don't mean a hill of beans. And so Paul was so furious, he was literally telling the Galatians, because you have done this, you've literally made Christ of no effect in your life. See, what would Jesus do means people are trying to be like Jesus in an effort to demonstrate their own righteousness. But if you ignore what Jesus did, see, Jesus, I'll tell you what, even Jesus isn't like Jesus who walked the earth for 3 years in that ministry, or who walked the earth for 33 years. He is not like that anymore. Even Paul said so. He said, we no longer know, even him we no longer know after the flesh. He came to do a job, he played a role, and he finished that role. Once he rose from the dead, he was no longer the preacher. He was no longer the rebuker. He was no longer doing anything he was doing. And so he, what would Jesus do is an insult to the Spirit of grace. What did Jesus do? That is an enlightenment that will make Christ of effect to you. And when he becomes effective to you, then you'll no longer try to be like Jesus. You'll appreciate the freedom that he gave you to be yourself. I know it's revolutionary. Have a revolutionary week.